Welcome to our Spotlight interview series. I'm your host, Chetna, and here we dive into the world of filmmakers who go beyond commercial cinema to tell stories that truly matter. Today, we have Weaam Williams with us. Hello, Weaam. Welcome to 72 Dragons, and we are very grateful to have you with us.
Hi, Chetna. Thank you for having me.
So, before we begin today's interview, let me briefly introduce our guest. Weaam Williams is a screenwriter, director, actor, and poet whose work has made a powerful impact across both fiction and documentary cinema. Her films are widely recognized for their artistic strength and their fearless engagement with themes of identity, dispossession, and women's empowerment. Her directorial debut, Hip Hop Revolution, premiered at Silver Docs in 2007 and won Best Edited Film at the NYC Reel Sisters Film Festival. In 2020, she released District 6 Rising from the Dust, which received international acclaim, including the Award of Excellence at the Scandinavian International Film Festival, and later won the Florence Film Award for Best Original Story in 2021. Weaam also created Two Hues, Africa's first NFT-distributed film, earning multiple international awards. Beyond filmmaking, she is also the co-founder of African Film DAO, CEO of Holocene Films, and a former juror for the International Emmy Awards. Please join me in welcoming the incredibly talented Weaam Williams. So Weaam, why don't we start from the beginning? Can you tell us when did you decide to work in this industry and what was the inspiration behind it?
Okay, I think I knew at high school already that I was meant to be a storyteller. I didn't know that I would end up being a filmmaker. Film was never an obvious career choice for me as a young person. So when I was in high school, I had my first short story published in our school magazine. I used to write plays, which I directed my friends in, and sometimes I'd act in them myself, and we'd perform it to the school. So I knew at high school level that I wanted to be a storyteller, and I was meant to work in the medium of writing. I didn't know how that would take shape or form, even though I was also studying mathematics and physics in high school. I thought I'd keep my career options open, but eventually I realized I was meant to be a storyteller. When I got to university, also, I had my first poetry published in the UCT publication. And I thought I was meant to be a journalist, actually. So I started out as an arts journalist while at the same time pursuing a career in film. And there were many things that I did simultaneously. So I also was studying acting. I started at UCT with drama, and then I went to the Cape Town Theatre Lab with Royston Stoffels, who's a well-renowned South African actor. And I was doing all these things simultaneously, working as an arts journalist, working in the live art theatre space, doing collective performance poetry with a collective called Weaam. They're the first published anthology of Black women writers where some of my work was included. And that was an incredible opportunity. I eventually got funding to make my first film, which was Hip Hop Revolution, a documentary film, and it exceeded all expectations. I didn't think that film would do so well, and it really is a very authentic piece of work. It's my first film. I was a director in my 20s when I made it. And it broadcasted in 28 countries. It won an editing award from Spike Lee at Reel Sisters Festival in the United States. And one of the very cool things about Hip Hop Revolution is that each editor brought a unique signature to the film. So there were several editors who worked on it, and eventually I took over editing the film because I felt like the story wasn't coming through enough. The story that I wanted to tell about the impression hip-hop had on youth during apartheid as a means of expression, as a medium for self-discovery and knowledge of self. I felt that wasn't coming through sufficiently enough in the edits that I had seen, although each editor brought a very unique montage to the film and a cutting-edge style. So there were many stylistic elements involved in Hip Hop Revolution. However, eventually, as a director, I decided to do the final edit, the final story edit myself. And I think it was with Hip Hop Revolution, after completing Hip Hop Revolution and a number of other documentaries, I realized that I am really drawn to directing, and documentary filmmaking was a good entry point for directing.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear about. Your films often explore themes like identity, social justice, and women's empowerment. So, can you tell me, how do you find the balance between telling a powerful story and making a strong social statement?
So I think this is a challenge for many filmmakers in terms of how do we make advocacy films which are in cinematic, which still get some kind of critical acclaim without being rendered an NGO or activist film. I think many filmmakers are drawn to activist causes, not all. But I think many filmmakers who come from developing countries, who come from situations where they have been exposed to challenges, will reflect these challenges through cinema. And the way that voice finds itself varies in different ways for different filmmakers. And for me, I always have to find that balance between something being creative and cinematic and it not being overly prescriptive in terms of what people are meant to think, and to allow that room for the viewer to discern. In documentary filmmaking, I try to create the lens and the narrative which allows them a gaze into another world and another perspective. And of course, as a filmmaker, I have my opinions, and I don't believe filmmaking is an objective process, and we have to understand that filmmaking is a very subjective process. So I think, with fiction, it's about creating that world of story and drawing the viewer into the story you're wanting to create. And it's really powerful when you create a world of story which is very familiar to yourself and which one can write from a very authentic perspective, but it does not alienate. It pulls in, it draws, it entices viewers to watch more, whether they be male or female, from the same ethnic group, social class, geography, etc. If your work is able to appeal broadly, I think, that is really a measure of success.
Each of your major works, from Hip Hop Revolution to District 6 to Two Hues, has broken new ground. Can you tell us which project challenged you the most and what were the learnings you got from it?
I think all of those projects challenged me in very different ways. Hip Hop Revolution, I went into forced labor on set. I was pregnant with my first child, and while we were shooting, I had major contractual pains, and everyone thought I was going into labor and I was rushed to hospital. But in fact, it wasn't the right time yet. When I decided to edit Hip Hop Revolution also, I was nursing my firstborn child. So that was a challenge, being a new mother and making your first documentary and then deciding to edit it. When I think back now, I think, wow, where did I get that energy? But I suppose there was drive and passion, perseverance, and the need to complete the film. More than the need to see it succeed, it was the need to complete the work in a way which was really pleasing to me. And then with District 6 Rising from the Dust, it came with a different set of challenges, in that I moved into a house restituted to my grandfather, who had been forcibly removed from District 6. And I experienced so much intergenerational pain and trauma when I moved there, which I had never understood before. And I began to understand the impact and pain of forced removals. But not only did I have this spiritual awakening while living in District 6, I also had experienced a physical trauma in that our home was broken into while we were in mid-production. My family, we were gassed in our sleep. They broke into our house, stole all of our camera gear, our beautiful Volvo station wagon, everything was stolen. And our things were not insured, So it was a very, very difficult moment for me. I felt like everything had been taken away from me. Both me and my husband are filmmakers, and it was like our life savings, how we had put into our camera gear and everything we owned. I just wanted to flee, and he said to me, we can't flee now. This is part of the story. We need to finish this film before we move out of here. And I was incredibly scared and fearful because the neighborhood was quite dangerous. And I think if you watch District 6 Rising from the Dust, you'll see how the film concludes. So that was a challenge. With Two Hues, the challenge was actually the acting part. I'd written the story, and I initially wanted another actress to play the part, and very many actresses in South Africa who I thought suited the part. And the person I had in mind rejected it. She thought it was a bit too crazy, too controversial. And because I had studied acting myself, my husband, who's a DOP, encouraged me to play the part. And he said, why don't you just, try and do it? And then that was the challenge for me on 2Us. I got a co-director involved, Dominic Jossi. The film turned out quite good, and I subsequently got an acting award. The challenge on that film, for me, the biggest challenge was the acting part. And I realized just how exhausting acting can be. Also, from a director's perspective, I always understood the importance of acting. But if you're in that seat, it's completely different, because everything else can be changed in post-production. Like, you can crop in on a shot, you can color grade, you can manipulate sound a little bit. There are many things that can be fixed in post, although we shouldn't be thinking that way as directors. But acting cannot be fixed in post. That's really one of the things you cannot fix in post. So that was, I think, the challenge and hurdle which I overcame in the 2Us short film. And I plan to continue playing the part in the feature film. And I have a very strong co-director on board for the 2Us feature film.
That sounds really interesting. We can't wait to watch the feature film as well.
Thank you.
So, also many of our viewers dream of becoming directors or screenwriters like you. So, if you could share one piece of advice that you wish someone had given you when you were just starting out?
I think, being a first-generation filmmaker in my family, there weren't many people I could go to for advice. And I think in South Africa, post-liberation, many of us are first-generation filmmakers who come from families who have somehow been involved in the revolution, who have been involved in the liberation of the country. We're first-generation filmmakers in our families, many of us. And so for me, I didn't have someone I could go to and say, well, this and that and that. There weren't really people I could springboard ideas from. And then also what I find in the industry is the competitiveness, so from a young age, the people who were senior to me saw me as a competitor rather than someone that they should nurture. So that has always been a difficult point for me, that I didn't have many springboards where I could go to in the industry because of the fierce competitive nature of the South African film industry. And so I wish, as a younger person, that there were people like me, like they say, you should be that what you would have wanted to be when you were younger. So I try and be that for a lot of filmmakers, that they can reach out to me and say, hey, I'm stuck here, I'm stuck there. So I try and be that for a lot of filmmakers within the African Film DAO community, without being competitors to them, and understanding that, there's that saying that lighting someone else's candle doesn't necessarily blow out yours. And I really believe that. And I think, if I were told at a very young age, I would encounter competition, I would encounter jealousy, I would encounter envy, I would encounter obstacles, I would encounter people who would want nothing more than to block my career for no apparent reason, I think I would have had a lot more insight and foresight. And I probably would have saved myself a lot of hurt. And it's over the years that I've adapted and learned the skills to separate myself, and to build my own brand and to be Weaam Williams without being defined by other people, And I think that's a really strong point for a filmmaker to come to, for a creator to come to, and an artist to come to, is to not be defined by other people, but to be defined by your work, your values, your work ethic, what you put out into the world. That's really important. My other advice to filmmakers is find your tribe. Filmmaking is a collaborative process. And I have found my tribe, even though I mentioned that I didn't have very many elders I could springboard on. I have very many peers, who support me and support my work, friends I can call on who will assist in whichever capacity, and your tribe might not even be the people you think they are. So I would suggest network, push your projects, collaborate. Collaboration is key in the film industry. People is leverage. And so once you understand that, you will move forward.
I feel that's a very good, important piece of advice. Thank you. So moving on to my next question, Weaam. You've pioneered new spaces like NFT distributed films and co-founded African Film Deo. So where do you see the future of African cinema heading? And how can young filmmakers prepare to be part of it?
This is the ideal of what I'd like for African cinema. I'd like to see more indigenous storytelling from various regions of the world, from various parts of Africa. In my capacity as a curator for various platforms, I have seen some great work coming from Ethiopia, some great work coming out of Central Africa. I see some good work coming out of South Africa, some excellent work coming out of Northern Arab Africa, and all of those works which I perceive to be excellent. And so for me, the future of African cinema is not to cut and paste what Hollywood has already done, or using generic story ideas and then translating them into a South African context or an African context, but really understanding indigenous culture and developing a folklore, mythology, historical narratives relating to the diaspora and its people, because we have such an interesting legacy in terms of history, culture, and oral tradition.
Also, looking ahead, what kind of stories are you most excited to tell next? Is there a specific medium that you see yourself exploring more deeply?
Yeah, so definitely fiction. I am working on, I still do have 2 documentaries, one is in development and one is in very late production stage. That would be The Rise. And then definitely fiction, the 2U's feature film is ready for production. I've managed to secure the interest of a very strong European producer for the project. He read the screenplay and was keen to come on board. So that's a good move forward for me on the 2U's project, because I do need someone with kind of international clout and also someone who has connections in Europe and around the world and in the Middle East to get this project off the ground. I have some other feature films in development. I really don't want to talk too much about the work that's not out in the public domain, because I've also struggled with copyright issues in the past, plagiarism, and so I tread cautiously in this regard.
So yeah, I believe that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you so much, Weaam, for taking the time to have a talk with us and sharing your amazing insights. I'm sure our audience, especially young folks dreaming of writing and conceptualizing great stories in the film industry, found this interview really inspiring and helpful. We hope you all enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. We'll be back soon with more guests from the world of cinema, so stay tuned. Goodbye.
Thank you.